This is 100 Tuesday Tips, Volume 1. And we're going to review this in about 30 seconds.
Yeah, and today's Tuesday too.
Every one of you watching this screen, look out.
Anything can happen in the next half hour.
What did I tell you about cartoons?
They've got a lot of brains, and they've got a lot of chutzpah.
Tell me how comic books make you feel, Dave.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious, and don't call me Shirley.
Hi, this is Frantz, Kantor, cartoonist, illustrator, and ToonTalker. I'm here with
Tim Bridges, and I'm the president of the Australian Cartoon Museum here in downtown Docklands, Melbourne, Australia.
Yeah, it's like a desert here. It's very quiet. You can probably hear. They've turned the music off. Have you noticed?
They have.
That's good. Yay! We can supply our own music. Thank you very much. This is what we're going to do today. We're going to review one of these books, and we're going to go and review the second one later on. But these are 100 Tuesday Tips by Griz and Norm. Griz and Norm are a couple of illustrators working in the industry in illustration, comics, and animation. So primarily animation. So you were going to ask me a
dumb question.
How does it figure into the drawing? Yeah, well, when you buy it, because they're self-published.
They're self-published, and they
sign it to you. And he's even put my is that France? No, Griz and Norm.
It's a cat.
It looks like
it's a cat with whiskers.
It's a little pussy cat
with whiskers. Yeah.
I was looking at. I'm used to having umlauts.
Is it all about you? Is it?
Yeah, it's always about me.
This book is dedicated to teachers and students.
Great, awesome. So let me just.
Are you more of a teacher or more of a student?
I'm both. All good teachers are better students.
By your pupils, you'll be taught.
You do. I whenever I prepare a topic for a lecture, it's quite. I always learn something new. And in the discussion,
well,
of course,
that's a great first page for a start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Look at all the the plasticity of the drawing. Look at these.
Well, with drawing in comics or illustration or cartoons, it's a really good idea to push the pose.
Push it.
So exaggerate the premise. The only area of this sort of pantomime approach to posing or drawing poses, drawing action, and drawing emotion, exaggerated poses, exaggerated expressions, etc. Pushing it. It's in opposition to a lot of the understated elements of realistic drawing.
But even the first one is pretty good. You know what I mean? The first drawing's good enough.
Well, being an animator, you can't really draw.
And look at this. Look at their hands and their feet. That's just beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, clarity and
clarity.
Yeah, clarity. Well, pushing it is great. Squash and stretch and exaggeration and. Anticipation and all of these different principles of animation.
Look at this hand behind his back. That could be something else you don't know, but then it's definitely there. He's pushed it back, and it's even better. That's clarity.
Yeah, but also working with a stylized, simplified form.
Yeah.
You can have more fun with the posing. So this is where this differs from traditional drawing books. Even traditional drawing books that start with construction, like Bridgman's anatomy drawing book, or Loomis's drawing book, right? They start with the construction of bodies.
Shapes, all shapes.
Not so much shape. Shape is a little bit sort of too simple for their procedure, but it's basically recognizing or remembering elements of anatomy so you can be able to draw it and construct something three-dimensionally. So it is simplifying a little bit, but this again is pushing it to the nth degree.
Personally, I think the title's a bit dodgy because, to me, these are more than tips. These are great.
Okay, so these are tips that came out on Tuesdays.
They're more than tips.
Yeah, they came out on Tuesdays, so tips refer to Tuesday.
Yeah, but these are more than tips because this is I don't know, extended tips. You can call it what you want, but these are like the last pages of the book, of the chapters, because they're so good.
Well, they're kind of like mini lectures in a way.
Yes.
So they're really, really
But they're all distilled. Look at that. I mean, just look at that.
Yeah.
God, Bern Hogarth couldn't do anything as good as that.
Well, 3 steps, starting out with a quick, bold gesture drawing. Gestures come from life drawing, of course. The word gesture comes from dance. There's no secret that the best life drawing models are dancers because they can move and pose in space itself. Looking for shapes. Looking for shapes and angles, right? So opportunities to simplify, and then extrapolating that the details, or putting the details that you see or feel, or that you need to put into the character, of course, are then easier to accomplish within the template, if you will, of the shapes that you've already dynamically drawn.
Fantastic drawing.
So yeah, this is a way of thinking. This is not a process of drawing, but you know, in order, this is a great exercise, by the way. It's sort of creating these three-dimensional polygonal versions of drawings, so that you fully understand how perspective works on the forms themselves.
Polygonal. Polygonal.
Well, it's sort of like a topographic version of a body.
Yeah.
So it's working out the volumes.
Yeah.
Volumes are really important.
Suggest volume.
Even when you're drawing 2D, like Simpsons are always drawn 3/4 view from the front, right?
Yeah.
But you need to understand volumes, and you need to understand perspective in order to draw it properly. So, you know, these are things to think about when you're drawing. So that's really important. Rule of contrast, that's a very interesting, this comes from graphic design. There's 3 kinds of contrasts here: value, hue, and saturation. So, you know, HSV are a way of...
Channel 7.
HSV, Channel 7. HSV is like from videographers' palettes, usually. It's a system of working out the value of an image, how light and dark it is, and the hue is, of course, the color. What's the intensity? What is the color? The name of the color, and then the saturation is how intense is that color, from a scale of grey to full hue. So understanding this thing, the 90-10 rule, is also known as the rule of contrast. Your eyes will always go to the area of high contrast or difference in a picture, meaning that 90% of something is at 10% of the opposite. So in other words, if it's predominantly 80% or 90% dark, that your eyes will go to the lightest element. If it's the opposite, it'll go to the darkest element.
Well, this is basically for advertising, isn't it?
No, this is for graphic design. This comes from graphic design.
Well, I mean, did you read that too?
70% of general color, 20% of a different color, and 10% of accent. These are recipes that graphic designers have kind of used for typographical contexts.
Are they any good?
Yeah, look, any kind of recipe that helps you work out a problem is a very good idea, right? Whether you stick to it, you know, rigidly,
but is this
up to
cookie
you.
cutting? Is this cookie cutting ideas?
No, again, it goes back to tips. So the tip idea is, you know, some of them are based in, you know, solid theory. Some of them are based in like anecdotal evidence.
Well, to me, a tip is a shortcut.
Yeah, I think these are shortcuts. I would call these shortcuts. You know, I love shortcuts. So the idea of these are 2 things here from animation, right? So this gives you a sort of a background in what Griz and all are all about. So line of action is, to put it simply, it's the direction of mass moving in space.
The spine of the drawing.
Yeah, you can argue that this is based on gestures, right? The main direction of mass or force or energy in a pose. It's sort of related to that idea. So the line of action, you can in a pinch say that it's a gesture, right? So in life drawing it'll be gestures. In animation it's called line of action. In animation, line of action is for clarity. It's to sort of point your eyes towards, a certain end result.
And this is really important too with any sort of drawing.
Yeah.
If you understand this before you start this.
Yeah. Well, there's one of the principles is not silhouette, but one of the principles in animation is staging.
Yeah.
So staging is clarity of purpose derived from the pose of the character.
Yeah.
The idea of doing a clear silhouette is to show the body language clearly.
Yes.
And show without any detail. So you're thinking about the character rather than actually doing it in the silhouette. You're thinking about all of the information, almost like pantomime, that you can clarify and exaggerate from the contours, the external contours of the character, which is envisioned in silhouette, right? So the idea is if you can get the meaning across with the silhouette, both the body language, the posture, and the details of what the storytelling is, what's going on, then that makes it a better and easier read. So silhouettes are very interesting. It's kind of primal as well, because as soon as we're born, we can't see very well. We're very, very fuzzy. One things we do pick out are, of course, the outlines of our mother's head. That's how we can sort of imprint and recognize. So all throughout our lives, the idea of recognizing shapes, the external shape of things, saves our lives.
He looks like a refugee from a Jules Fife story, doesn't he?
Well, again, when a cartoonist is drawing something that is like, don't draw like this, draw like this, the drawing that they draw not to draw like is always better than somebody else's. Because, they can't help it. It's already in their system, all of these exercises. This is an interesting concept of color. So they're going into outside of drawing into color palettes and other elements.
Color clocks.
Yeah. So color clocks refer to the color wheel. The color wheel, of course, goes with all of these different colors. Primary colors. There's 3 primary colors, depending on whether you're talking about RGB, which is video or real life, or paint and print. Which is, of course, CMYK.
Basically Berkeley.
Yeah. So you have different different primary colors. For example, RGB color wheels are red, green, blue, and CMYK color wheels, the primary colors, of course, are cyan, magenta, and yellow. And
they never teach the colorblind color wheel. You notice that at schools?
Well, if you can't detect the opposite colours on a colour wheel are called complementary, which has got nothing to do with paying compliments.
No, or cutting out pieces.
Yeah. And then colours that are close to each other are analogous. So these are just different patterns of picking colours for a palette, right? So this palette here is red and sort of a blue, teal blue, and a pink. So they would come from, they're actually saying here orange yellowish. It doesn't come out really orange yellowish, but split complementary is just a way of saying that 2 colours that are close to each other, next to each other on the colour wheel, and then 1 colour which is opposite, which is a complementary.
There's a lot of information stacked in these, and we're only up to a few pages.
Yeah.
You're really into it, aren't you?
So
you really get into it.
The idea of creating a colour palette, which is quite popular. First of all, you find an image and then you sample it. You can either pixelate it with a filter in Photoshop, or you just do samples. Just use your color dropper or something. There's other software. I think Adobe has one. I can't remember, Mosaic or something. I don't know. But there's lots of different ways of creating color palettes from images that you find attractive on the internet. So, and it's just really part of that thing. It's just finding something rather than using random colors when it comes time to color your drawings. you have a plan.
Straight against curves. Well, this is pretty primal stuff, isn't it?
Okay, so this comes from television cartoons, from television animation. The idea of straight against curves is really to increase the value of shapes to express action, and also strong poses and things like that. If you can imagine, say, a Samurai Jack that uses a combination of straight and curved lines to draw their characters. And what happens is, it's an interesting point because in nature there's very few straight lines, and certainly in the human body there's very few straight lines. But ironically, if you wanted to express a direct action, a direct movement, you have to use some form, you have to straighten those lines. So it's a way of using this concept of exaggeration and simplification, almost using symbols. That's why symbols are very handy in a cartoonist's vocabulary, because once you do that, this
So you think of straight / curve as a chef's knife.
yeah.
That's great. That sort of
Well, it creates dynamics.
It distills everything you've just read on the page.
Yeah, you see this here. There's all these little things, like the eye goes up straight lines fast, and then they travel down this ripple effect slowly. So it's to create a rhythm in drawings. And if you create a rhythm in drawings, right, then the trickle down effect, in a way, is that you're creating something that is more playful to look at. It's more interesting to look at and has more fun to draw, certainly, and more fun to look at as well. So it has a lot more variety and dynamics. There's some really good instructions on, this is like camera work, dominance in an illustration or a frame or in a drawing, where you're using curves and straights, which are body language. Also perspective, the use of perspective, cameras that tilt up or tilt down, say certain things about the visual language of it, says certain things about the characters and about the situation.
And I've asked you this before, but I've forgotten what you said. What's a Dutch tilt?
I don't know if it may have another name, but Dutch tilt is usually rotating like this. That's a Dutch tilt, right? So whatever axis that is, rotating in the x-axis is a Dutch tilt. X and Y. And it's used dynamically, principally for action films. A lot of action films. It's to put you ill at ease. It's to put you sort of at a disadvantage.
Well, when they brought in widescreen, I remember when I first saw Rebel Without a Cause. Suddenly, you get used to the long screen. I was pretty young when I saw it. Came out in '56, I think. It came out just before rock and roll. And all of a sudden, the camera's at an angle, and my God, it's almost
it's
the
just
effect it has on you with that ratio is extraordinary.
Well, our language of composition comes from graphic design, fine art, and film. So that's where it comes from. So when you're illustrating or composing images in something, then all of these areas go through your mind. Your exposure to graphic design and advertising, your exposure to fine art, to paintings, and also your exposure to film. And of course, all of those areas are kind of cross-pollinated in any case. So film has influenced fine art as well. So this is another cheat sheet, another tip sheet on color. This is a basic explanation of primary colors. And again, looking at triadic monochromatic or analogous colors. They call monochromatic or / analogous colors. Monochromatic is one color. So it's one
different
color.
Shades, different shades.
Different shades, different values of one color. Values and tints. Tints and shades, sorry. Tints and shades are the different saturation and different values. So primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. Primary colors in the traditional color wheel is is red, blue, and yellow. Right? In the CMYK color wheel, of course, it's cyan, magenta, and yellow, which is a particular blue, not ultramarine, and of course it's a pinky red. And that's for printing and for painting, for mixing colors like paints. Secondary colors are colors that are mixed between two primaries. So if you create in RGB, if you create blue, if you mix blue with red, you create a purple. Right? That only works in an RGB. That will not work in paint. You cannot mix red and blue and create purple paint. It doesn't work. You've got to create purple with, which is still a secondary color. You've got to create, well actually before purple, purple is a tertiary color in CMYK. But you've got to create it by mixing magenta and cyan. That will create an ultramarine blue, which is this blue here, and then the ultramarine blue and the magenta is used to create the purple. I know it sounds really technical, but it's the best I can do. This is a very basic understanding of color theory.
It's a very colourful language you're using there.
Yeah. So complementaries are opposites on the color wheel. Think in this terms here, red and green, which is Christmas or South Sydney, the Rabbitohs. A lot of complementary colors are used by football clubs because their idea is it stands out. You know.
Yeah. With the mud and the rain and the grass.
Yeah. Color anchors. This is a very new theory, color anchors. It's to do with something that you'd have to sort of read this, but it's basically one color that stands out, which is a color which your eyes pick out first.
The anchor.
Yeah. In this case here, of course, it's this sort of magenta, this pinky color. All right. Hands. Hands are second to faces are regarded as the most complex things to draw. This is a way of approaching the hand, which is a very, very sensible way of creating a cartoon version of a hand, but still referring back to the anatomy. So you've got all of the different positions, the different structures, but greatly simplified. Now this is a perfect way of drawing a hand and thinking about it, you know. Things like fists, right? It's sort of like a bunching up of these polygons, these sort of rectangles in a way, but thinking of the shape, the overall shape first, without getting too torn up about the specific, you know, shapes of the elements of each finger and things like that.
If you actually tried to draw each finger individually, you'd be buggered, wouldn't you?
It's a hard subject to tackle, to be honest with you, because it's quite complex. It's the same thing with the face. It has very complex, minute shapes within it. So the best way I found of looking at it is to simplify it. And if you use cartoon to simplify it, you'll get a better effect. And this is not Mickey Mouse's hands, right? That's a little bit too simple. This is more referencing a real-life construction of a hand. So from this, it's quite easy to, you know, draw a more realistic hand based on how you've constructed it in a simple premise.
Here's a question. We all know why cartoon characters have 4 fingers instead of 5, because it's easier to animate. But why do they wear gloves?
Okay, so Mickey Mouse was black. His skin was black.
Contrast.
And the hands needed to be able to point and to gesticulate.
Okay.
So they decided to put opera gloves, not just white gloves. Opera gloves.
Yeah, what's opera gloves?
What's opera, Doc?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're just it's just a handy little trick. It's like, you know, characters with bow ties. Right?
Yeah.
Hanna-Barbera characters had collar. Yogi Bear had collar and tie.
They all had collars, yeah.
And a little hat. You know, it's the same thing.
Even Fred Flintstone had a tie.
There is a reason. Yeah. There's a reason for. There's a reason for it. So more on hands here is using the idea of gestures, which come from, or the line of action, which came from a previous tip.
That's a religious gesture. Give us some money.
Right. Okay.
This is good.
I was waiting for the punchline and it didn't come. Yeah. So, gestural drawings of shapes. Always looking at simplifying it. As long as you can simplify it, you can manage to draw it quite well.
Red and green is never seen.
So popular Western Christmas color scheme. Fun fact: true red and true green at 100% intensity saturation both have 50% value. So again, going back to the Rabbitohs or football jerseys, they tend to have the same value. In other words, if you grayscale them, they would be 50% grey. They don't have any sort of tint or shade. If they're in full intensity, they don't have
So
a
if they're
natural.
too close to each other and the original's in colour and it gets...
Whereas magenta and yellow would be lighter usually. Yes.
Yeah, but I'm just saying if the colours are much closer and...
Well, this is
the
far apart.
The original colours,
Yeah.
and then they're reproduced in black and white,
Okay. So
that it wouldn't work because there's not enough contrast
Yeah.
in the greys.
yes,
Yeah.
that could be it as well.
Yeah.
Maybe they intentionally do this so that it does have in black and white print have contrast. So that could be the reason why they do it. I've never really thought about it, but that actually makes sense. So these are little tips again. These are little not exercises, but sort of observations. In this case here, it's working on doodles, I think. Make doodles from original painting. So it's the idea of deriving from an original painting from one source other ideas, which are sort of generative, So yeah, a little bit of the thought process behind the actual design process or character creation itself, which is really handy. So you can see already in this book, right? It's incredibly valuable and diverse. The tips here are not just for drawing.
It's distilled.
Yeah.
Very distilled,
Yeah, so there's a lot of, classical drawing tips with new directions.
And now you're back to the feet, whereas before you're on design, and
Yeah.
it sort of interplays both that. So you're sort of getting like...
Well, feet like hands are notoriously difficult to draw.
Yeah, but I mean,
And this is
normally
a
in a
way
book
of-
you'd have hands and then you'd have feet, right? But no, they have design in between it. So I'm just saying they're incorporating the different types of drawing.
Well,
the
actually,
design
quite. I
and
know.
figure drawing
I know.
in,
So it's
in,
not a
in and
tradition-
out of the book. So it's
Yeah.
a very interesting
Yeah,
way
so
the book's
it's not
put together.
sectioned in a traditional
No,
way.
no.
Yeah, which is good because it keeps you on your toes.
And that's right. And
This is how the
I
two
think
set
it,
tips were
I
put
think it
together.
also gives you confidence to get stuck into stuff.
Yeah.
See, that's an interesting idea. They've done that before, the hand and the foot, It's just...
Yeah, so this is a good, these are cheats on how to pose feet and hand, or pose feet that have more sort of relevance or more believability. There's also things
See,
like...
that's a great idea. I mean, I've never seen it
Thinking.
in one of these books. You know what I mean? That's how you should be thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So usually it's, look, hands are the same way. You
Yeah.
have one thumb and four fingers which talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's the same thing same concept with feet. You have the big toe, which is like the thumb, and then the other four toes only cluster together.
But that's lovely too. Look, just even
But
the way
even-
they're put together, it's just lovely.
Yeah, this is a cheat sheet on poses of feet and hands. So you sort of get an
Hands on
idea
hips,
of
hands on
what
hips.
to sort of look for
Yeah.
in foreshortening and different angles and, expressions of weight and action, etc. So, looking at these, you kind of see, even with, they've got these direction lines, which are kind of handy too, because that's sort of the gestural context of the drawings, which is really cool. Highlights. This is another cool cheat sheet here. Warm object, cool highlight, cool object, warm highlight. So it's basically looking at the temperature argument of colors. There's some colors that are associated with warmth and some colors are associated with cold. and those are a good color argument to have in opposition. So here you've got a very clever way of creating contrasts that stand out by use of temperature. So, you know, warm object like the red ball with a cool highlight. So there's certain cool qualities to the highlight itself. So it's a nice way of thinking. I mean, it's very subtle here. You can say, well, there's no cool there, but you know, there is a sort of it's a pushing of the value of the hue into a more cooler palette.
It's a shocking shoe, isn't it?
Yeah. Flower sacks is a great starting example for squash and stretch and anticipation and all of that for animation. And it has a lot of, it's got a lot to do with it's firmly establishing weight really quickly and simply, because flour tends to gravitate to the bottom of the sack. And that's why you get this sort of shape, right?
What about self-rising flour? Rises to the top, doesn't it?
I have no idea. I think, you know, we'll have to sift
I'd
through
ignore
that.
that. I'd ignore it. I'll sift through it.
So even with that, you know, it's very easy to anthropomorphize things. Flower sack, notwithstanding, you've got the ability to turn him into a really cool character.
But this is a great exercise because it's about
it's not scary. It's a simple object which can be you can draw, and then it's up to you to put in squash and stretch.
If these were people, you'd be worried about where am I going to put the head and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
this is basic primal.
Yeah, it's just the torso.
Like you go from that to that.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, and look, that to that.
Yeah, so the simple helps to understand the difficult, complex. Simple palette exercises, these are really handy, you know. When in doubt, you always use less. So the idea of simplifying or reducing your color palette, this goes back to classical painting as well. So you reduce the color palette, so it's not such an intensity of hues, and then use that as a palette, and that you'll find is a more pleasing end effect. So it's more under control. It doesn't sort of stand out like football jerseys.
This guy likes drawing hearts.
Yeah. So this is also a good...
there's no right or wrong way to paint.
Okay, so this is a palette exercise, right, for different variations on a palette. So it's the same palette, different variations. This again is a process painting of from sketch to final illustration. Interesting enough, the redraw of the shape is not in the final illustration. So there's no outline. It's drawing, it's outline less. It's drawing without leaving the outline, which is very contemporary. It's very, very cool. Gesture drawing, these are great gestures. Gestures come from life drawing, of course, very similar to line of action. There's a few more elements in gesture drawings than line of action because they can have quite complex directions. But they're basically there to capture the body moving through space, and they could be depicting a gesture could be depicting an emotion, you know, something like this, and or something like this. There's a very sort of emotional response to drawing. So, you know, these come from life drawing. I tell my students that, you know, when you draw these gesture drawings of models moving in space for life drawing, if you exaggerate them slightly with the concept of turning them into a cartoon character, you'll get a better result because it's fun and it's easier, it's faster to do, to process. And you're still looking at volumes, you're still looking at proportions, but you're changing them on the fly, so you're exaggerating.
And this is good too. Find which leg or part of the body supports the most weight.
Yeah. So again, weight is one of the key elements of animation.
So that's
It gives us really good cues on volume and posing, and there's a whole lot of things that weight sort of tell us about a body when you use it or reference it in a drawing. Tangents are quite a new term. It's about these confusing lines, right? So the way that illustrators get around tangents is to have overlaps or like an overlapping shape which exemplifies the outline of the foreground against the background, or the foreground against the next background layer, and then etc. Is to create a sense of space. Something's in front of the other, and is to create a sense of clarity. So in animation, the use of tangents, or beware of tangents, is to promote clarity. So you can clearly see the head outlined without any distracting lines that touch the head itself. Rules of cropping. This comes from film. So I'm not sure whether the rules of cropping are, again, is to do with tangents. So you don't crop on the chin line. You sort of give a little bit of air, right? So that you know that the chin is connected, or the head is connected to a neck, right? So you're implying other bits of the body outside of the drawing. That's the rule of cropping. So you're implying there is a composition. What do you call it? It's an open composition concept, right? So this picture here, the full body, is a closed composition. In other words, all of the elements that tell us about the body are in this picture. If you were to crop it, that's a open composition, which means that there are elements of the body which are not in view, but you still know that they're going to be there. They exist. You know they exist, right? So that's an open composition concept. So the idea of cropping is you crop just enough to give you enough information that the body extends past the frame. You understand that? You don't get it. Open and closed composition comes from
I get
painting.
that. I get that.
The idea of open composition only happened. It didn't exist in painting prior to the invention of the camera.
That's right. That's right, because that's when painting seemed to get very modern all of a sudden, because it was cropped.
Degas.
I mean,
The first people to own cameras were artists.
And Lautrec sort of got a woman with half her face in the corner.
Yeah. So with cameras, artists could understand perspective. They could understand this new narrative of the crop. And
it's really interesting.
Movement and colour.
If you get a pre-Renaissance print of something and you crop it, like you crop the head of a Giotto or something like that, right? It looks modern. As soon as you crop it, it looks modern.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So this is a life drawing setup. A lot of people have this saddle thing, this bench that you straddle. You can also do it on the back of a chair or something like that. It's really up to you. I don't know why this is there. I guess it's people that want some information about. Well, how do you do life drawing? Do you sit at a table? No, you're better off sitting on a chair or something like that. So this is how a lot of the classical studios are set up.
Well, I mean, every drawing I've ever seen, every drawing or photo I've ever seen, people have easels when they're doing live.
Yeah, well, they can hold it on their
of course you could. Yeah.
And there's also I just want to very, very quickly say something.
And if you're in a park and you're watching
pencil,
something, if you're in a park and watching something, you haven't got your easel or your this. You just sort of,
on a pad.
Yeah.
So the same with iPads, is that they're just pads.
Yeah.
The idea of the grip on a pencil, this sort of grip, I call it the violin bow, is very good for drawing lightly and loosely. This grip is very structured and pointy, and it's very good for drawing details. So just remember that there are different grips involved for different styles of drawing. Okay, and you will need different styles of drawing when you draw. This is very loose drawing. You'd be using the violin bow probably
one
to do
continuous
gestures.
line, yeah.
Yeah, so without taking your pen or your stylus or your pencil off the paper, you just draw a selection of lines and circles to illustrate volume, and just keep the pen on the paper. Don't take it off, right? So that gives you a very fluid feeling for the drawing itself. Very good. Composition 101. This is interesting. So there's a lot of rule of thirds, of course, comes from film. The use of good tangents and bad tangents. This is something you'll have to sort of decide. Again, this comes from rule of thirds, and that come from graphic design as well. Rule of thirds is used primarily in film, though.
It started in painting. Thirds.
No, that was the golden section. That was the Fibonacci spiral and the golden rule and all of that sort of stuff. It's similar to the rule of thirds, but it's a little bit more complex. It's to do with a mathematical formula.
Okay.
It basically it gives you a formula to place objects in the picture plane. That if you hit these sort of intersection lines with the object, then it's supposed to give you a better effect.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
More pleasing effect, more aesthetically correct.
Yeah.
All right? So, it's really up to you to decide whether that is a valid thing or not. Whether it's, I would say try to experiment, play with it as much as you like, but don't, I don't think anything is a hard and fast rule with regards to composition. So silhouette in storytelling, very valuable in storyboards, because of what I said before.
Clarity.
Yeah, clarity. You can clearly see the action involved and the emotion of the character. So really, really valuable. Stick figures with oomph, with sort of, I call them shtick figures because they've got a lot
shtick figures.
They have a lot more chutzpah than the normal stick figure. A lot more emphasis and descriptiveness. So you can very clearly create these dramatic effects that are very, very telling, and a lot of these come from film and comics, and it's quite a varied path of using silhouettes to exaggerate and enhance a feeling, a mood of a scene. This is quite dramatic, isn't it? That probably comes from comics. A lot of these come from comics. There's a beautiful silhouette scene that was used in a lot of films.
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, and that silhouette idea was used in Tara. I'll never go hungry again. That scene.
Yeah, you can cut a
I
hole.
hated when she sang that. That was awful. She was terrible in it.
Actually,
that's one of the most horrible films I've ever seen.
I agree with you.
I
You
don't like
could
it.
cut a full hour out of that film.
Ugh.
But, Superman's in the first.
I love. Yeah, that's my favourite
Superman's
part.
in the first minute.
Yeah, he gets killed though. Film study.
You can't kill Superman. He's got to live to have a son who became bisexual.
So.
Boy, that's an update, isn't it? Right up to date now.
I haven't seen that one, but
Yeah.
anyway, film study. Film study is another great exercise to do. The idea of this is to create a bunch of storyboards from a film. You're breaking down a scene into stories based on the film itself. So you look at, for example, that's Babe, but this one here is beautiful value boards of Rebecca.
It is, yeah. I was looking at this. There's Mrs. Danvers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, this is really cleverly, these are beautiful exercises. If you want to do this, great. Pick something classical by all means.
Keep it simple and time yourself. Also, watch the movie first.
Yeah, you watch the
watch
movie
it twice.
first,
You watch it
and
twice, yeah.
you know, for the first couple of goes,
Yeah.
you won't remember the shots.
Yeah.
So you'll probably want to pause it quite often.
No, but that's a great exercise because it's
Yeah.
quick and grab it quick, you know. And
Yes.
Get the essentials down. You know?
Well, you know, a lot of these, the visual language of film is, it's natural to us because we watch a lot of films. But this kind of instills the vocabulary into your system so that you know, can eloquently storyboard something and know what you're talking about. And not just the angles either, or the details, or the silhouettes. It's the choice of values of light and dark. And
But
the
also,
creation of
like,
depth with these shots.
you'll have a shot of a person or something, and he's thinking of the pig, and then the next shot, where his head was, it was here, say, in the previous shot, and that's where the pig is.
What's
So
fun
that
is you go through
that
Babe.
visually connects it,
Yeah.
without you even realising it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's you're using the film language or the visual language of film as it is in the director's edit. What's interesting is when you start to improve on it. So finding elements where it could be improved, right? A lot of these shots. So if you were to break down, say, Night of the Living Dead, right? Night of the Living Dead is a great film, and you can really improve on it. It's got a lot of gaps in that film.
Pretty
So
rough.
It is pretty rough. It's pretty good for what it is, and it's public domain, which is even better. So have at it. Contour line is the outside shape of the figure, like this, the concept of silhouettes. You know, you concentrate on the contour line, which gives you the details that show angles and proportions. There's a whole lot of things, but just drawing exercises where you just draw the outline is also quite valuable. So a lot of these exercises you appreciate are independent of themselves, but kind of in your brain, they kind of join together and create an exercising, a muscle exercising technology, a muscle exercising process, sorry, not technology. So it's really important to understand that individually they may seem wacky, but once they're processed, once your brain processes these simple things, you know, accumulatively and sort of contextually, they do build up.
That would hurt. Can you do that?
This is picking a side, the complex side and the easy side. So everything has a rhythm and a extension and compression. So same thing. That's why they've used this. There's a lot of extension and compression of forms. So that gives anything with variety. We tend to call sort of a rhythmic effect in drawing, and rhythm comes from music.
Where are these guys? Are they from America?
dance.
They from America?
Yeah.
Okay.
Female body proportion. Now, this is quite contentious, of course, because
Well, it used to be
it's to
7
do
and a
with-
half. It used to be 7.5 heads,
yeah.
but that's
Okay, so
and now it's 8.
here's my take on it.
Now it's
This
8.
sort of stylized waist, the wasp thin waist, which you see in Barbie dolls,
Yeah.
or used to see in Barbie dolls, that sort of impossibly thin aspect. That's to do with stylization and caricaturing of forms. They exist in the female form, but not as pronounced. So this is a typical normal figure, proportions and shape, body shape for a female, and this is an exaggeration of it, right? But there is inferences of exaggerating shapes that go in and go out. So that's all I'm going to say on this. Stylization, simplification. It is not objectifying or body shaming or anything to do with that. It is. It's more to do with creating a stylized visual language that is easy to read. It's a similar thing with doing fingers for females that are pointed. Usually, classically, females have pointed fingernails, as opposed to men. So the body construction of males are usually blockier and more a lot of
Jack Kirby-ish.
yeah,
Very,
so
very
blockier,
blocky.
and because males are generally bigger, and more muscular or different shape to a woman, to a female. So females have a distinctly different shape. There are blends, and there are different. There is so many variety and differences. So let's not go into that. I'm just saying that there is a direction that is not to do with body shaming. It is to do with stylization, and that's all it is. All right, so try not to read too much into it. It is not as bad as you think.
Oh, this is Loomis.
So this is based on the Loomis method of constructing a head from a ball or a sphere or a circle, and then dropping the jawline. So the facial features are dropped off the sphere. You never draw a head, never construct a head with an oval. The head is only an oval viewed from the front, right? Not from the side, not from the 3/4 angle. So the idea of drawing a head as an oval is counterproductive because it doesn't translate into rotations. Head foundations here again, this is very handy of thinking. Again, this is the Loomis method of a sphere with the sides cut off to form the temples of the head here. It's also very good for understanding
This is really
the basic
good. And
modeling,
then you get that.
light
That's
and
very
shade
good. That's a
construction.
very good page.
Yeah, and also for doing head turns, you have these horizontal lines. So to keep all of the elements the same horizontal position. Head turns, of course, are from, usually in animation, although not exclusively. I've seen them used in illustration and comics.
Blood Chicago.
This is a little painting lesson, right? This is an interesting method. This is how I paint, usually, except with watercolor. So this is oil paint, gouache, or acrylic, and this is also digital as well. So I usually paint like this. In other words, you create something dark, and then you bring highlights forward. This is the method of doing this, and this is how that's laid out, very simply.
Is that
Painting
is
eyes.
that tried and true? Like
No.
I've been painting like that
Everybody
for
has
hundreds of years? Or
No. Everybody has a different way, different method of painting that you can get. The very subtle nuances of flesh tones, for example. Using what's his name? Who did the Venus Rising from the Waves? Botticelli.
Sandro.
His method
Sandro.
of painting flesh tones
Yes, it
were
was-
very different to
That's
Da Vinci.
right. That's right.
So, or Rembrandt, right?
Yeah.
They used very warm tones all the way through. Botticelli started the flesh tones with green, knowing that the opposite of green, it would call up when you put layers of pale paint over the green. The Tyndall optical illusion effect would mean that the opposite color would come through. So in other words, it would look pinker, even though the base colors was green, were greens or olives. So that's just a technicality, but it's observation and method that lead to that. Painting eyes 101, right? Knowing that the eye is not a symbol for an eye, but an actual object. So that's really important to understand the physical properties of the eyeball and the iris and the pupil.
Sleepy little eyeball, Sandman's coming.
So really, really important.
No
The
straight
concept
lines.
of no straight lines in life is a good practice. You can see how lifeless this creature is here, this robot of a stick figure. Then a stick figure with the same amount of information, even less information than this stick figure. When you use the principle of no straight lines, it instantly has more dynamic and more sense of living. So the same thing again, the straight and curves is a way of, this is called rhythm in drawing. So you have this sort of rhythmic effect, you know, which is kind of like music and...
This is really interesting, like stage hands first when dealing with foreshortening. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, you have to draw the hands first and then draw what's behind the hands. So, you know, very subtly, the hand here is quite big, quite close to the camera, so it's hiding everything behind it. But in order to get the right position of the shoulder, you'll need to draw what's in between.
That's great tip. Great tip.
Yeah. This is again, this is another, the idea of gestures. Hands have their own sort of energy and
storytelling
uses.
abilities.
Exactly, yeah, like faces.
Yeah.
So they have their own individual points. They're not just ends of
Well, besides
limbs.
besides being gestures, they're also emotional.
Yeah, HSV again, the his master's voice. No, hue, value, and saturation. So contrasted value. Over here, you can see how in grayscale those colors have an effect. This one here, the grayscale actually disappears. The low value of the colors that they picked here tend to turn into gray. All right, so it's quite hard to understand, but you can very easily get it by converting in Photoshop your image into black and white. Limited palette, or otherwise known as the Zorn palette, comes from limiting the colors. Limiting the number of palette colors. Here is a salmon, ultramarine, and a grey, and that's it. Those three colors create this very chromatic effect, very colorful effect, but there's only three colors used. How is this possible? It's the use of value and saturation, which has enough information in it to tell us that it is color. More examples and tips on drawing the eyes. Again, these are more expressions coming from symbolic uses of eyes, like you know, the creation of dots in eyes and how to create how to use direction of those dots to create context, to create a simple read or clarity again, right? It's all about clarity rather than
there's a drawing.
Just
there's a drawing by
physical
Hirschfeld.
anatomy.
There's a drawing of Hirschfeld from Some Like It Hot.
Yeah.
And Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, who are dressed up as women, they're hiding out from the gangsters.
Yeah.
They're looking at Marilyn Monroe's breasts.
Yeah.
And their
looking
eyes
from the side
actually come out. So that pupil,
they touch the edge of the eye.
no, that goes out and they look like nipples.
Their eyes do.
Yeah, their eyes look like nipples.
I think you've been too close to the screen. I haven't seen it.
I'm just saying it's a really, really great effect. It's a really great effect.
Okay, so
But
ears.
he's a master.
Yeah. So ears, right? Ears from the front, ears from the side. Get used to their implicit
I like the way you draw
shapes.
ears. I like the way you draw ears.
Yeah, and even ears from above and ears from the back. Ears
Yeah.
from the back, ears from above. Right? Drawing those ears from different angles is really, really handy. How to think of them, basically in construction of the volumes, the ins and the outs.
Always
of
in
the
a slight
ear.
ear.
A good direction, this comes from observation. I don't know who started this. I think this came from classical drawing. probably
Question
Andre.
mark plus Y.
Yeah, so the question mark is the outer rim of the ear,
And then-
and the Y is the inside structure of the ear. Right? So those things that's a simple way of describing the basic structure, viewed from the side, like this. The side of the head. These are different examples of drawing with pen, right, to construct halftone using different stippling effects, or cross-hatching, or hatching, parallel lines, scribbling, to create tone with pen, right, is very, very valuable. And then these are volume exercises, so how to construct what to think about when you're trying to draw these volumes with a pen.
Using
a pen is very, very valuable because it tends to make contrasts work really well, and forcing you to design or process the idea of values from light to dark.
We have to do a film about Virgil Finlay, don't we? We really do. He was the master of that stuff.
Of stipple, yeah. So noses, again, you know, I had a student who refused to draw noses. She found them quite intimidating and very hard. She could draw faces, hands and things like that, not noses. She found them a bit daunting.
Not noses?
Yeah, so, you know, thinking about angles and different shapes, thinking about cartoons, obviously, like the process of drawing the hands. If you simplify them or use your innate ability to create symbols of them, and then push those symbols to be more naturalistic, not realistic. Remember, I'm not pushing you to be realistic, but more naturalistic.
If I was teaching that girl who was freaked out about noses,
yeah,
I would give her plasticine,
yeah,
to play with, and say, look, make me 6 different noses.
What do you think I did?
Oh, did you do the same thing?
Yeah.
Oh, good on you.
So, you know, being familiar with the subject is what this is all about. So the more times you draw the nose, the less scary it becomes. Yeah. Same thing with hair. You know, people think about hair, they think of its complexity. It is very complex when it's bunched. It has different properties of falling and cascading and all this sort of stuff. And, you know, and even when it's short or fairly short.
Well, you tend to want to draw every hair, but that's not the point. I mean, the point is
simplifying again.
Yeah, the shape.
Yeah, this is why this book is really valuable, because an animator has to simplify. And the process of simplifying is actually incredibly valuable for learning to draw complex. Stylizing an object. So again, using your graphic design skills, which we all have, simplifying an object. Graphic design basically runs on the principle of cutting out all of the extraneous details so that the message or the direction is very implicit and simple and quick to understand. This is, I think, I don't know whether it's Griz or Norm that does these, but one of them are very interested in fashion. This is Griz. So Griz is very interested in fashion, and she's done this beautiful little encyclopedic chart of shoes, styles of shoes. God, so, you know, you can see what a T-strap looks like, or a sling bag.
Is that what ballet dancers wear when they wear high heels?
Yeah, the booties, the boots. Where's the pumps? Oxfords. That's also a men's shoe. The peep toe, the round toe, the almond toe, the pointy toe. Fantasy. What's this?
Heelless.
Heelless. The wedge, the spool, the chunky, the flat. You know, these are platform stilettos, pumps. There's a pump. I don't know why is that called a pump? I guess it's just like a low stiletto. It's just a normal style shoe. But this is really cool. You know, if ever you are ever mystified by all of these different names of shoes, well, she's done a chart for you. Beat boards, storyboards. What's the difference? There's an example of beat boards, which of course I like the emotional expressions of, you know, the key parts of a film, of a narrative. Storyboards tell the whole story visually, and these are examples of that. These are really invaluable when you're constructing storyboards, because not only are the characters expressive and simple to draw, you know, but they stand out beautifully from the background. So they've gotten rid of all of the extraneous details. The idea of storyboards, for storyboards to work, they're not illustrations. Storyboards that work have to be simple, have to be very, very simple and clear. Very clear. So these are fantastic examples of that. Then we're getting into practice. This is a use of sketchbook and different materials. Pen and ink is great. A sketchbook which can, you know, contain all of these exercises. Really handy because you can always reference, go back through the sketchbook. How did I draw a hand before? How did I do this before? You always refer back to the pages that you've done before. These are type of shots. Again, this is to do with film language, more associated with, I suppose, storyboards, but can be applied at a pinch for illustration or for, indeed, comics. There's an example of a Dutch angle. It's to create a sense of dynamic movement. And up shots and down shots, otherwise known as, this is called an LA, which is a low angle. This is called a HA, which is a high angle. So different language from different eras, perhaps, but it's the same thing. So film language comes from the build-up of knowledge of watching films, right? Every director likes to do things a little bit different. They like to mix it up. They like to refer to, like Tarantino refers to classic films, but he does it he really improves upon, what he's studied, what he's looked at before. If you ever see any of the films that Tarantino watches or refers to, they're almost unwatchable. They're horrible.
Yeah,
but
he ransacks the history of cinema.
Yeah.
That's what he does.
Of certain cinema, exploitational cinema.
Well, yeah, but the soundtrack, for instance, like for instance, in the middle of what's it called, Pulp Fiction, I'm hearing something from a Bette Davis movie.
Yeah.
Now you couldn't call a Bette Davis movie a slasher or something like that. You know what I mean? And then I hear another set, and I'm thinking, well, that's from a Bodicher Western made in the 50s. So
but
he pinches dialogue besides types of films. You're talking about the visual stuff.
But that's a better way of tackling that issue, because in order to understand something, if you take a fish out of water, then there's a fish out of water. You suddenly notice that technique, you suddenly notice that angle, that shot, or that characteristic of a film, and he's referenced it from something, or it's given him an idea from Turkey Shoot or some crappy film, and he's looked at it.
There's people who'd be going crooked jukers saying that. Turkey Shoots,
I didn't like it. So,
what's that? What's our Australian film? He loves Australian slasher films. Was it Boar or was it Razorback? Yeah, loves that. Yeah.
All right, so we differ on a lot of those films. I've seen his Galaxy Bookshop in London. They have a shelf of his favourite picks of films, and I looked at it, and it was 90% Australian.
Where were you in London?
All Australian films that I didn't like.
When were you in London? Oh no, you saw it online.
No, in London. I was in London. So, types of shots, very, very cool. Over-shoulder shots, everything here. So these are, as again, tips, Tuesday tips. Now we're talking about film. Very handy when you're coming up with storyboards. So, know your shots and how to use
Even comics, that's very similar.
Yeah, these are little tips on drawing fur, how to draw fur
and hair.
So and how they're used in an illustration in a very cute, stylized, retro-looking cartoon. Very, very cool to see this and why they use it. It's like a rationale of the of this sort of symbolic approach to using of fur. Very, very cool. Markers and pencils. So the use of pencils and then markers to add more value, more details and tone. So a good tip on technique. Skull and bones. These are life drawing tips on what to look for. Try to find or pick out the hard surfaces within the soft surfaces, the different parts of the skeletal structure which are visible, usually when the skin is stretched, so you can see the ribs and the scapula and things of the skeletal underneath the flesh. Visual anchors. This is another figure drawing tip. This is to make more context or more interesting drawings, rather than always having nude characters. If you use props, they kind of give a different sort of narrative, and they have different, like the drawing, jean shorts or something like that. They're sort of little tips that are put down on the spur of the moment, which are really, really handy to look at these.
Well, in the Hanna-Barbera films,
Yeah.
they all wear ties and stuff like that, but that's a differentiator because the head's going to move and be talking, whereas the body's stiff, so they've got to have some sort of cut-off point in the middle.
There's a
And is that an anchor? Is that an anchor? Is that a visual anchor?
no. These are props to enhance certain properties of the drawing. So they're enhancing volume or to disguise volume and to just create certain, I guess, looks, a feeling of three-dimensionality within a drawing. So sometimes when we're drawing something, it's all about the outline, right? And you become, the volume of the thing, or the perspective of the object or the character becomes almost invisible. So forcing this idea of putting in lines and bikinis and bras and things like that, they all have obvious linear properties which are different to the outline of the figure. So that gives us an anchor. It gives us an idea of anchoring what should we be looking at drawing here to express three-dimensional space. This is a lovely exercise in a very stylized cartoonist approach, Griz again, on drawing ponytails, and also a lovely exercise on drawing hair, which is beautiful. And you can sort of take this very simple exercise and extrapolate it into drawing some really beautiful effects in your illustrations. So it's a nice little handy tip there on the process of drawing something that would be scary to most people because there's a lot of detail. Shape contrast in characters. This again comes from a couple of sources, mostly in animation, where you have to first of all construct the characters using simple shapes that you understand instinctively, and also the reader can view them and read them instinctively. But it gives us a sense of easily extending that to exaggeration. So looking for simple in the difficult. So looking at something and say, oh, that's hard to draw. But if you look at it in terms of its simple shape, right, and then draw the simple shape, you're then able to draw in all of these details quite easily. So that's a really good tip. This itself is an incredibly valuable tip. Always look for the simple shapes. And, also think about the directions of things too, the gestural qualities and the exaggeration possibilities. When you exaggerate something, you're actually learning faster because you're looking at where those lines should be and you're saying, I want to push it further, but you're still learning. You're learning two things. You're learning where the lines should be
and where they
where you're putting them.
Push them, yeah.
Basic color palettes. This comes from fine art sensibility. Gouache palette set up for different things. How to. It may seem very simple, right? But I promise you that keeping the colors in a color wheel format means that you're not going to get so many dirty, muddy colors. You're just keeping the yellows next to the oranges, which are next to the reds, etc., etc. You're categorizing them visually, but according to the rainbow or according to the position of the colors on the color wheel. Because remember that opposite colors create black in paint. Okay, so if you were to mix red and blue, if you were to mix, say, magenta, and if you were to mix yellow, magenta, and cyan, you'd create black.
In paint, if you mix red and blue, you get black.
In paint,
or dark purple.
Well, in paint, red and blue are not in paint. They're not primary colors. They're secondary colors.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
So in paint, the primary colors are yellow, magenta, and cyan. If you mix all those three colors together, you would get black. That's the CMYK. That's the CMYK color wheel. In an RGB color wheel, The primary colors are green, blue,
yellow,
ultramarine blue, red, and yellow.
Yeah.
So the mixing of those three colors together create white light. So that's the difference between subtractive and subtractive. What is it? Subtractive and subtractive something. I don't know. There's different kinds of color readability or color visual acuity. Anyway, getting back to this clothing, it's really important to understand. You know, this might seem funny to you, but drawing folds, drawing clothing, wrinkles and things like that, t-shirts even, you know, t-shirts that are tucked in, t-shirts that are loose. You might think, oh, well, that's just the, you know, they're just shapes, right? We think about them. But no, it's a little bit more complex than that. They're actually referring to the anatomy underneath. So all of this sort of pinching has a sort of a directive. It's very important to understand that they refer to the anatomy underneath. So these are bunching around the knees, these are bunching around the ankles.
All the old books, they had lots of dresses
and you're
and
gonna
stuff like that, and had lots of folds and curtains. But this is modern, and modern clothes are very tight.
Yeah, well, this is also canvas.
And form-fitting.
Yeah, well, this is also canvas, which is stiffer. So t-shirts, for example, have more curvy wrinkles, and stiffer fabrics have sharper wrinkles. You know, so that's very important too. But you'll only really understand that. I can tell you this, and you can read this here, but you'll only ever understand that by drawing those wrinkles, by drawing those jeans or those t-shirts. That's the only way of doing it.
10,000 hours.
And the sheets, the draped form.
10,000 hours.
Different kinds of fabrics have different kind of wrinkles. Soft falling, you know, wrinkles, and soft falling forms, and tight, bunchy, sharp wrinkles, and they all denote different fabric, different textures. But they're referring back to the movable joints and the anatomy of the figure underneath. So it sounds more complex. It will come clear once you start drawing closed figures. So if you draw enough of them, it will kind of it will sink into your consciousness. This is a gouache process, so it's slightly different to watercolor. Watercolor usually start light and then you walk. You basically in various processes. In paint, you gradually build up intensity and darkness. So you start light and pale, and you build up intensity and darkness. With gouache, it's pretty much flat colors. It's still water-based, but they're putting down these flat colors one over the other. And it's almost like a way of doing acrylic painting.
With Klimt, he had a lot of gold in his paintings, right? And you're a fan of his. Did he apply the gold last? It was always last.
Yeah.
And is it a paint or is it actual?
It's foil.
Foil.
Yeah.
You put the foil on, yeah. Because you really can't get gold paint, can you?
You can, but it's very difficult. It's very difficult to make.
Yeah, but it's also it's not as effective as say the foil.
Leaf.
Yeah, the gold leaf. Yeah.
Gold leaf is preferable. This is I'm not understanding this at all very well, but basically it's a way of understanding gold. What is this sort of glittery effect? How can you replicate that in Photoshop? You know, and there's a sort of process of using this sort of sponge effect, this mottled effect, and then using highlights or creating selections or something, and putting in finally, you know, these sort of star clusters.
All the blisters
Star effects. So leg supports, again, more observations on legs, and in particular, you know, squash and stretch, or the implication of weight.
Carrying weight and stretching.
This is really handy on, you know, drawing something that's difficult to draw, a lot of details. You have to start with basic, simple shapes. The simpler the better. And if you decide to use more symbols for expressions and things like little dots for eyes, etc., then have at it, because it just makes the drawing more expressive. See, these are beautiful drawings, and they're just very simply done, you know. But even then, they're sort of, they have elements of caricature, elements of symbol, and they're very expressive. And you know, that running figure there, and even these two posing figures, even the baby. So they're very, very simple and expressive at the same time. Very powerful. So it's a way of drawing in shorthand. That's what that's called. Okay, basic construction. This is usually, it's good having it at the back of the book because they're really, really boring. The basic idea of this is a Photoshop method of creating different textural effects on a sphere, understanding lights and shadows, understanding textures, shine and highlights and ambient lights and all of these different things, and how to replicate that in a computer environment. So these are good exercises, both the spheres and the cones, right? They have different things. You can see here they've got nice elements of fill light, or do they use the planetary? No, they don't. Okay, so in shadows there's a fall off, and in these shadows there's fall off from dark to light, and that area of dark shadow has a certain name. I think they call it the umbra, and the area of lighter shadow has another name called the penumbra. This is something to do with planetary shadows, believe it or not, but there's quite a lot of information about that on the internet. Basic primitives, using those textural exercises for cubes and cylinders as well. It's really, really handy, so you can get an idea of you know, how light works three-dimensionally on three-dimensional objects, and that learning those lessons, you tend to bring those lessons into your drawings. So if you're to draw like a person standing on a platform, you know, you can start to think about these lessons, and that will give you an indicator of, oh, there should be a bounce light maybe coming from the platform into the shadow areas to lighten the shadows on the legs. Face profiles. This is very interesting from different angles, and also playing with expressions. Squash and stretch, of course, doesn't only apply to the actual shape of the object. It could be within the facial features themselves. So simplifying again makes the exercises really understood better. Face profiles, it's very easy to cut short and not give enough volume to the back of the head. So obviously when you start to think of a ball, right, then you're immediately giving it more emphasis, so that it's got more correctness, more visual believability. Asymmetry in facial expressions, we love to use that. We love to see that in drawings and in animation. There's also tilts and rotations, which is possible by constructing, you know, a sphere as a base construct for the head. This is quite a common thing, the idea of the nose and the eyes as a sort of a mask area, where you've got a lot of this sort of ability to do these asymmetrical expressions and shapes, to exaggerate and to clarify. Remember, it's not just exaggeration for its own sake, but to clarify the expressions. That's why dots are used a lot in animation for eyes. They're simplified and they're very, very clearly indicating where the person is looking. Eye darts, for example, come from that idea from The Simpsons, from 2D cartoons, where characters' pupils dart across the surface of the eye. Ideas of drawing the mouth, right? Never be afraid to draw lines, because that is an actual thing, the mouth shapes. Very, very, it's the most flexible element of the face, so don't ever be afraid to simplify. You know, that's a very good rule. Combining primitives, of course, is to create a sense of variety. These are really nice. So it's almost like a three-dimensional doodle in a way, to create some form of argument or a creature or a shape that is inventive. So it's creating something that is just capricious, just fun. That's it.
But you've got to put the shadow in the right place. And all
yeah,
that
it's a good. Yeah, but it's a good game to play. So we often see, well, that's an interesting shape. What if this was his nose, or what if this was his mouth, or this was his jacket, and this was his head, and these were his eyes? You know, so you sort of see relevance within shapes. We tend to do that with clouds. We do that with things all the time. We have a very particular way of creating our narratives from our environment. Shadows, a good way of thinking about shadows. They talk about the umbra and the penumbra. No, they don't, but they do talk about core shadows and reflections and things like that. Always remember that shadow indicates the direction of the light, right? So that's really important, isn't it? So we're alluding to the direction of where the light source is from the length of the shadow and the position of the shadow. Always remember that shadows fall on surfaces. Surfaces have perspective. So that's a good cue for using perspective whenever you can, unless it's your intention to do Mr. Magoo, which is also cool. So life drawing exercises. So, you know, mixing up, right? Curves and straights, and only curves where your pencil just basically doesn't lift off from the paper, to another exercise which is finding these angles. So this is just drawing the figure with straight lines, no curved lines at all. So resisting the urge to do curved lines around buttocks and waists and breasts and things like that. You basically stick to straight lines. So there's lots and lots of straight lines. What happens is it's informing your brain or your body, with your muscle memory, whatever you want to call it, with these sort of directions. So you're kind of making these quick turns on the road. These very, very sharp, quick turns on the road to get to your end.
You'd get a lot out of that exercise.
Yeah. It's a good thing to
You have to really think about it.
Well, it's very easy to make spatial associations with straight lines. It's less obvious with curved lines because, you know, curved lines have different values, different personalities.
Yeah, but I mean, you know, bums and breasts are round, and so you really got to think about how you're going to show that in a straight line. I think that's a great exercise.
Yeah, so these are little things to think about when you're drawing different parts of the body in life drawing, right? So, you know, volumes of gluteus maximuses and the buttocks and the volumes of the thigh and the positions and shapes of belly buttons and these cartoroid muscles here on the side of the neck, and what do the cartoroids look like from the side, from the rotation when the body rotates. You know, overlapping forms like forearm muscles that overlap the biceps. You know, directional things like these sort of rhythmic approaches to offset rhythms, drawing arms, particularly drawing arms and legs. You have this sort of offset rhythm going on. Thinking of the structure underneath, not the structure, but the muscular structure underneath the skin gives you good good cues of you know, sometimes there are exercises in drawing just the skinless body, so you can kind of get an idea of where these shapes come from the stretchiness, the stretchy parts, and the textures and the direction of muscles where they attach and stretch over shapes and over each other. Yeah, so, you know, these are good indicators of stresses and pushing and pulling, contracting and extending in muscles that give you variety. And this is the end result, where you've got a good symmetry, a good sort of, not symmetry, a good arrangement of forms that have variety. All right. Are you still with me? You've gone quiet.
Are you talking to me?
Yeah. Are you talking to me?
Are you talking to me?
Check your values. So this again, I can't express this enough. Whenever you're confused, you convert the image into grayscale, and you're able to understand what's light and what's dark, really, because color can be very confusing. This is a perfect example. Usually we say blue is light and pink or red reproduces darker.
Is that one of those colourblind tests, is it? You've got to find the girl in the bikini.
Yeah, color comp or thumbnails are working out your color combinations and their different values, different approaches. You can see here you've got dark skin tones, dark warm skin tones against a pale background of blue, and then it goes down to something that's more equal value, and then the opposite value, where the pinks, the flesh tones are light against the background, which is cool, which is blue and darker. So it's creating a color composition that works in terms of contrast, that makes the foreground elements stand out from the background. Here we go with life drawing power shading. The shading is very important. In life drawing, of course, you've got this use of very dramatic lighting usually, and that gives you a good idea of volume, of creating this sort of volume effect. This is incredible. If you get a shot like this, you have to pick up a pencil and draw it. This is incredibly valuable, this sort of spotlighting of figures in life drawing, because not only are you concerned with construction and all of the other elements, gestures, etc., that you're studying, but you're now studying three-dimensional space.
The column.
Yeah. So those sort of, and you can see how he has actually drawn these halftone lines in the direction of the muscles, I guess, but they're very, very descriptive. But over here he sort of used a crosshatch, contour crosshatch line, not contour, a topographic effect of the shading on this figure, which gives it a very voluminous effect, but very dynamic at the same time. So these are just different versions, an underlight and above light. You can see here lights are typically, I draw this myself to instruct. These are sort of directional beams, arrows, three-dimensional arrows of lights. Thumbnails, this is to do with graphic design, working out shapes and the value, not the values, well, values as well, because there's a lot of that. But it's working out positionals, and there's a lot of composition involved in designing, in graphic design. And of course, text and shapes. Text is also like shapes. It has to be composed. So this is their process of creating the cover for the book.
Do you think that thumbnails is a modern idea? You can't imagine.
Yeah, Da Vinci used to do thumbnails.
Did he?
Yeah. So
Did he?
Yep. Oh yeah. So printing guide, business card printing guide. These are just little things from their work, from observation, and what to put in, which is handy for students, for tips. So this is there, so you don't have to think about it. It's all worked out for you. Beautiful. Body shapes. Again, shape language, right? So looking at body shapes, simplifying the complex. So always look for the opportunities to create something that's simple, and then building up on that. Same with the idea of teeth. What's this for? The idea of teeth is, what do we think about when we have to draw teeth? What are they? The bunch of teeth in the mouth, and also their construction in the base of the jaw and things like that, in the skull, and also cartoon variety. Why not? So the exaggeration of all of these things, and the use of symbols and memes and cliches and things, are what makes the process of drawing much more fun. This is their print guide for the book cover, which they're sharing with you, of where all of these different elements are. So if you wanted to draw a book, if you wanted to create a book, you've got the template, basically. Understand, well, I haven't done this, I haven't done the bleed. you know. So printing guide again, inside pages, you know, these are really great. So how to, you know, even using TIFFs if you're on a Mac. So how to use cropping guides and page widths and what happens with a gutter, how much to allow for the bending of the paper, etc. You know, getting back into the drawing now, more acting, less anatomy. So the idea of simplifying these sketches so that you're able to get something that approximates acting with a pencil. They call it acting with a pencil because animators traditionally have to draw something that doesn't exist. So if the person is angry or sad or whatever, they have to draw that. So in other words, they're referring back to their own personal experiences and from studying references and things like that. So they have to perform, they have to make these little drawings perform, act in essence. These are little examples of what to look for when you're drawing back. So with the spotlight effect, of course, you've got the volumes of the back muscles, the great big things, and areas of where fat tends to congregate.
It's a very distilled
congregation
way
over there.
Teaching anatomy, this is the way they use it.
Yeah, it's very short form. They're tips. They're not long form lessons. They're short form tips, and that's what makes it really exciting.
This is interesting because I've understood something. You know, the lung. I mean, that's the back, but there's the back of the rib cage. You never think about that. You think of the rib cage always in the front, don't you?
Yeah, but also there's these large muscles which nobody ever thinks about, the muscle groups, the wraparound muscles underneath, the wrap over muscles for the, you know, that go from the neck to the shoulder. They don't just connect, it's not just a space between hard surfaces between the neck and the shoulder bone, the whatever it is.
Hear the word of the Lord.
Yeah, it's not just the bone connected to the shoulder bone. It's in fact has its own incredible dynamic volume and rotation and properties. So these are done like to give you an idea of where the muscle direction underneath the skin, how the forms actually create, and it gives you good idea of perspective and three-dimensional space. So the last tip is here about visual development portfolios, just little tips for people. This is really interesting. Rhythm, make sure it tells a story. Most people don't think about that. They just put pictures up and say this one's first, this one's second, this one's third, etc. But if you have a rhythm and you have it tells sort of a story. Anything that's sequential has a story property. So as long as you accept that understanding, then creating a story out of your portfolio is a pretty interesting proposition.
Well, even when you put together an exhibition on the wall.
Well, you know about that because you put together stories.
But I'm saying
exhibitions.
it's like making a film.
Yeah.
You are telling a story, although you may have all different.
Well, normally, no, I don't tell a story.
No, but you have all these pictures that are separate.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty
You
sure
create a narrative.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure that when you put those three pictures up there over there, the Mexican things.
Oh, they have narrative because they're a triptych.
Yeah, but you can
can't
move
see
them
what he's
anywhere.
pointing at.
You could move them anywhere you want. You could put the
You
middle
do.
picture to the left and the right.
You can.
But by moving them around, you'd say yes. Well, this is
you
telling me
stay
something.
away from my
no.
monkey hands.
No, this is telling me something.
Yeah.
And even if you're not sure what it's telling you
get
put
to-
it up because that is
Yeah.
the beginning of the narrative.
Well, you know, the interesting thing about what you just said is with visual narratives or sequential properties of paintings that are in a series or something, you know, the ability to swap and mix them around and swap them around to create different narratives is a really exciting prospect. Doesn't occur to the artist initially, but of course over time I think it just lends itself to more possibilities and
I always wanted to do an exhibition where you could turn the pictures around on flat, you could turn the picture around and there's another picture on the back. So every time someone walked into the exhibition, it'd be
It's
a different
different.
exhibition.
That's
You know what I mean?
interesting. There must be some kind of a virtual reality version of that somewhere.
Well,
All right, this is Frantz Kantor and...
And that's a thoroughly exhausted Jim Bridges. I think you did a great job there, mate.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this is, these are lovely books. Please support these guys. They're fantastic. If you order 100 Tuesday Tips, is still available. It's self-published. And they're
I think
signed to
there's
you.
more information in that book than if you bought about 4 or 5 how-to books.
And it's got a beautiful, you can have your lunch on this cover. It's a nice little map.
Yeah. And all that information about shoes, my God.
We're going to have a look at this
preview
next
Have a
time.
quick preview. That's it. That's enough.
That's enough.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's it from us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and we'll see you next time too. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thanks for the sour persimmons, cousin.